Namaskar everyone. Today I will discuss an apology for poetry written by Sir Philip Sidney sets out the restored poetry to its rightful place among to the art. It was written in 1580 and it was published in 1595 after the death of Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney is the first critic of Renaissance. The word apology is taken from the Greek word apologia, which means an argument in defense. It is a form of a judicial oration for the defense, and thus it is like a trial in structure. For Sidney's poetry is an art of imitation for a specific purpose. It is imitated to teach and delight. For him, poetry is a superior means of communication, and its value depends on what is communicated. He preferred imaginative literature that teaches history and philosophy. Poetry has gotten a bad name in Elizabethan England, disrespected by many of Sidney's contemporaries. But Sidney contends critics of poetry do not understand what poetry really is. They have been misled by modern poetry, which is frequently bad. An apology for poetry is a response of Stephen Garrison school of abuse. If one understands the true nature of poetry, one will see, as Sidney shows in his essay An Apology for Poetry. Here, Sidney uses the word apology which means defense for the poetry. Sidney begins his defense of poetry by noting that poetry was first of the art coming before philosophy and history. Indeed, many of the famous classical philosophers and historians wrote in poetry, and even those who wrote in prose, like Plato, wrote poetically. Stephen Gosson published School of Abuse in 1579 and he charges on poetry. But I would like to tell you in An Apology for Poetry he has not used the name of Gerson. The name of Gerson. Gerson charges poetry is the waste of time. Poetry is the mother of lies. Poetry is the nurse of abuse, and final charges was that Plato had rightly banished the poet from his ideal work, Republic. The poets were the first writers not only in the England but in Greek, Latin, etc. Poetry traces its ancient root. They were well honored and respected, even classical philosophers and historians. According to Sidney, poetry is an imitation with a specific aim to teach and delight, speaking picture to teach and delight, better than history and philosophy. History shows experiences of past by giving examples of historical personages. Philosophy deals an abstract concept, and through philosophy we define good and evil, bad and good. God, mankind teaches the learned. He says poetry is superior to both history and philosophy. Example, uh, example he percepts poetry has living characters, stories, tale with message and teaches. its purpose and to promote good and discard evil, like Aesop's fable, speaking animal teaching through beast. The first charge of Stephen is that poetry is a waste of time. But according to Sydney, he says poetry is better than other subjects. Poetry teaches us with delight. Its poetry promote virtues and discard evils. Second was poetry is the mother of lies. He says sometimes make false talent in philosophy. Sidney answers that poet does not lie. The poetic truths are ideal and universal. Therefore, poetry cannot be a mother of lies. He gives the example of physicians claims that certain medicine will cure fatal disease are found incorrect. Same as astronomers claims about the sky crystal things proves wrong. The third is poetry is the nurse of abuse. To him, it is a pupil who abuses poetry, not the vice versa. The fourth one is, and that is last one, which is Pluto had rightly banished the poets from his ideal republic. Pluto's philosophy on virtue is worthless. At the battlefield, where the poet teaches man how to behave under all circumstances. Moral philosophy teaches virtues through abstract examples, and history teaches virtues through concrete examples. But both are defective. Poetry teaches virtue by example as well as the precept. The poet creates his own world where he gives only the inspiring things, and poetry holds its superior position to that of philosophy and history. In the poetry, poet has its golden world. In this way, Sidney defines all the charges against poetry and stands for the sake of the universal and timeless quality of poetry, making us know why the poets are universal genius. Thank you.